Hello year ones and twos and welcome to Miss Palmer's weekly video. Hope you had a lovely week last week despite the awful weather. This week's task is going to be a reading task. So if you look on your home learning grid, I am going to read a story to you, and my story is one of my favourites, Mr. Large in Charge, and then you are going to do a book review of the story I read. So you need to listen really carefully to the story, and you need to be thinking about these. If you're a year one, your book review is going to look like this that you need to complete. So you need to decide how you are rating the book out of 5 stars, and you need to be thinking whilst I'm reading the book, what's your favourite part of the story? If you're a year 2, your book review is slightly bigger, and you need to be thinking about what is the book about whilst I'm reading, who are the main characters, where the story is set, so is it inside, is it outside, is it on the moon, and what did you like about the book? And then you're going to rate the book 2 out of 5 stars. So be thinking about these things this morning whilst I'm reading the book. Okay, so Mr. Large in Charge. Mrs. Large opened one eye and peered out at the morning. She forced open the other eye, dragged herself out of bed and set off downstairs to the kitchen, where Mr. Large had kindly started the children on their breakfasts. So if you're thinking about your characters, you've got one character, Mrs. Large. "You look ghastly, dear," said Mr. Large. "Don't say that to Mummy," said Laura. "Mummy looks beautiful," exclaimed Lester. "Beautiful," cooed the baby. "Yes, of course Mummy's beautiful," said Mr. Large. "I meant she doesn't look well. Are you feeling all right, dear?" I don't think Mrs. Large looks well at all. "As a matter of fact, I don't feel too good," admitted Mrs. Large. "But I was going to take them all to the park later. Then there's the shopping, and there's lunch, and there's—" "Well, you don't have to worry about any of that," said Mr. Large. "It's the weekend, so I'm in charge. Go on back to bed with you. We'll take care of everything. Won't we, kids?" "You bet," yelled Lester. Mrs. Large trudged back upstairs, clutching a nice hot water bottle, and sank back into bed, which was still warm. "What a treat," she said. Downstairs, Mr. Large was organising his troops. "Right, men," he commanded. "We're not all men," said Laura. "Oh, you know what I mean," said Mr. Large. "Well, troops then, all right. I'll take the worst task, that's the washing up. Lester, you can tackle the hoovering. Luke, pick up things off the floor. Laura and the baby, general dusting and cushion plumping. Quick march, 1, 2, 1, 2, off you go." Mr. Large turned on the radio, found a jolly tune to cheer everyone along, and soon they were all busy with their tasks. Upstairs, Mrs. Large was jolted back from the brink of her sleep by the astonishing amount of noise blasting up through the floorboards. She listened anxiously for a while, but could soon tell they were mostly happy noises. So she wedged a pillow around her ears and decided to ignore it. Or the noise. Mrs. Large had just drifted off to sleep when she was rudely awoken by the baby, who was giving her a thorough dusting. "Sorry, Mum," yelled Laura, rushing in and grabbing the baby. The baby began to scream and hung on to the bedclothes, as so they both fell over backwards. "This isn't proving very restful, Laura," said Mrs. Large crossly, as Laura disentangled herself and the baby and attempted to bundle the bedclothes back onto the bed. "Mummy, huggy!" screamed the baby. "Want Mummy, big huggy now!" Laura stuffed the baby under her arm and wrestled her out of the door. "Don't worry, Mum," she called as she closed the door behind her. "I'll take her down to Dad." "Don't want Dad," bellowed the baby. "Want Mum, want my Mummy." Mrs. Large rearranged the mangled bedclothes and snuggled down, feeling decidedly jangled. Suddenly there was an almighty crunch from downstairs, and the Hoover stopped abruptly. And the Hoover looks like it might have hoovered something up they wasn't meant to. The bedroom door opened and Lester looked in. "It's all right, Mum," he said, reassuring her. "Nothing broke, it just sounded bad." Luke's head appeared around Lester's knees. "That's right, Mum," he agreed. "Nothing to worry about. You just go back to sleep." Mrs. Large was finally dropping off when Mr. Large crashed open the bedroom door. "We're all off to the park now, dear," he announced. "We'll get the shopping on the way home, then we can bring you up a nice lunch." "Thank you, dear," said Mrs. Large. "I'm having a lovely rest." I don't think it looks like Mrs. Large is having a lovely rest. Mrs. Large beamed and blew a kiss as he backed out of the room, closing the door very quietly. At last, Mrs. Large dozed off. What seemed like 5 minutes later, she was awoken by the smell of burning. Just then, Laura put her head around the door. "Dad says not to worry about the smell," she said. "He's getting the lunch and he wants to know if you'd like some." "What exactly is it?" asked Mum. "Well," said Laura, "it was something in a special sauce, but Dad just had a little look at the football on TV. Well, it was quite a long look, so it's now cheese sandwiches." "I think I'll carry on sleeping. Thank you, dear," said Mrs. Large. "Perhaps I could join in at tea time." "Righty-o," said Laura, slamming the door as she rushed off to tell Dad. Mrs. Large closed her eyes and tried to relax again. What seemed like 3 seconds later, the door crashed open again and all the children came charging in. "We're going to play football with Dad," yelled Lester. "In the garden," said Luke. "Now," said the baby. "Are you feeling a little bit better?" asked Laura. "Mummy better?" asked the baby. "Big huggy." "A bit better," said Mrs. Large. "You go and have fun with Dad, and perhaps I'll be okay later on." Big huggy," wept the baby as Lester scooped her up and carried her out the door. "Big huggy, Mummy, now!" The door slammed shut for the 100th time. Mrs. Large winched and slithered down under the covers. Joyful sounds came drifting from the garden, and Mrs. Large smiled contentedly. 5 minutes later, Lester burst into the bedroom. "Dad says, where are the bandages?" he yelled. "Don't worry, Mum, it's not the baby." Dad tripped over the rake. "They're on top of the bathroom cabinet," said Mrs. Large weakly. After a while, the door opened again and Mrs. Large came in carrying a tray laden with tea and cakes. The children sneaked in behind him and lurked. The baby didn't lurk for long. She climbed grimly onto the bed and clasped her mother round the neck. "Big huggy," she croaked. "Everyone out," ordered Mr. Large. "Let Mummy have her rest now. She's not well today." Mrs. Large heaved herself into a sitting position and patted the covers. "That's all right, dear," she said. "I've had a very restful day, and I'm feeling much better now. Why don't you all join me for tea?" "Well, if you're sure," said Mrs. Large, and everyone piled onto the beds. Hello. We had a nice walk. Are you coming to listen to the story? "Well, if you're sure," said Mr. Large, and everyone piled onto the bed to tell Mrs. Large all about the day she'd missed. The end. And they all look absolutely exhausted. Okay, so now it's your turn to do your book review of Mr. Large in Charge. Now, if I was picking my favourite part of the story, I would pick the bit where Mr. Large tried to make dinner and then he started looking at the football and got distracted. Because if my dad was in charge, I think he would probably do something very similar. So decide on your favourite part of the book. Think about, if you're the year 2, the main characters, where the story's set. And good luck, and I'd love to see all your book reviews. See you later.